We have about 5 minutes before we're due to start, everybody. The first speaker's starting at 2:05. So if you want to grab a quick coffee, now's your time.
Although Brian will start at 2.
Oh, will he? Oh, sorry, John. Sorry. Okay, well, you can't go. You can't grab the coffee then. You've got to. Yeah. So 2 minutes before we start.
John?
Yeah?
Can I ask you, when I share a presentation, you said you had to do something first before. So I'll have my presentation on my screen. What do
you
do?
In PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Just excuse me a moment, Brian. I've just got to click one button. In PowerPoint, you should go to slideshow.
Yeah.
That is to say the tab, the ribbon,
yeah.
And then set up slideshow.
Yeah.
And then choose the second option.
Second option.
Browser. It talks about browsed in a window.
Okay, right.
Then OK that and save the file.
I could do that now, I suppose.
You could do that. Yeah, absolutely. Do that now. I'm going to have to stop talking shortly.
Okay, we're good.
Because we're about to start. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the third of our sessions. And this particular section focuses on planning issues, which, of course, given the current circumstances of a white paper with the most radical suggestions that we've seen since the 1940s, makes it a very relevant topic. We'll run from now until 3:30. There will then be a 1-hour break, and at that point we will come back to the last session of the day, which is focusing on delivery. At the end of the last session, there will be a virtual bar in which we can provide the chat, but not the physical support or the liquids. But everybody is welcome to join us for half an hour's natter if you so choose. This particular session begins with James Harris from the RTPI talking about the relationship of housing to public transport and what has happened in the past, and results from really rather remarkable studies. That will then lead into Richard Simmons from the CPRE talking about green belt issues and the protection of the countryside, which again, given the current white paper's proposals, as something that's very much on the top of the agenda. And then finally, Jenny Raggett will give a more detailed analysis of what's actually in the white paper about planning, not about planning, about transport, and what she suggests kind of things that might be done in terms of the responses which are being asked for to this document. And then there will be a brief Connected Cities presentation that will last a few minutes after that before we all go to breakout rooms and you have the opportunity to speak in depth with each of the speakers. So I won't natter on anymore, but simply pass over to James, and would you please launch away, James? You may have to unmute yourself.
Brilliant. Hopefully you can see my slides.
Yes, we can see your slides and we can hear you. So perfect. Great, go for it.
Those are the main things. I'll kick off. Yeah, so I'm James Harris. I'm the policy manager at the Royal Town Planning Institute, which is the professional body for planners in the UK. I was just going to give a quick run through about the the important function that the planning system has in delivering all of the good public transport oriented settlement pattern principles that I'm sure you've been talking about today. And really just, the broader role of planning in meeting a whole set of really important economic, social and environmental objectives. I always start this kind of presentation by just running through some of the key kind of national challenges that we're trying to address here, because it's not just about housing, it's not just about transport, it's about a whole bunch of different things that we're trying to do all at once. The one that's kind of top of the agenda, it seems a lot of the time for planning, is the housing crisis. We obviously have a big lack of affordable housing across the country, and but definitely not all of the solution to that is to increase the supply of new homes. And we have the government committing to increasing supply to around 300,000 new homes per year. So that's one thing that we need the planning system to do. Another big one is around economic productivity. Of course, we still haven't really recovered from the 2008 financial crisis. And there's a really pressing need across the UK to attract the kinds of clean, high-value, knowledge-intensive jobs that are really going to drive our economy in the 21st century, especially in places which are suffering from deindustrialization still. So that's another big challenge that we're trying to address. Third on my list, probably the most important one to me, is climate change. We all know what we need to do here. Keep global average temperatures from rising above 1.5 degrees. We have our legal commitment to achieve net zero carbon by 2050. And of course, we've got to deal with the, boosting our resilience to the environmental risks that are already here and are only going to grow over time. And lastly, I think the key thing that the planning system needs to do is play a much stronger role in public health. We've got a major crisis of obesity, of rising chronic non-communicable diseases like cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure. We've got to really have the planning system respond positively to these challenges, not to mention things like our aging population, problems of air pollution, making sure that people can access healthcare. The role of planning in health is really important. And what I've been trying to do with my research at the RTPI over the last few years is try and demonstrate how planning can actively contribute to each one of these objectives, kind of all at the same time. And it's, the key message here, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, is that linking up planning and transport is just critical to making any progress on any of these. What we really need the planning system to do firstly is to have a proper strategic level plan strategy in place for growth and regeneration, where growth and settlement expansion takes place along multimodal transport corridors, as indicated in this diagram. We need clear hierarchies of regional and local centers. We need traffic restriction measures in place in the right kind of area. These are the kind of very basic building blocks, which I'm sure Brian and others have gone over already, for how we need to be growing our settlements if we want to increase housing supply and increase the amount of land available for jobs. Then within localities, again, there's pretty simple and well-agreed principles that we need to follow about where we locate development, which of course prioritizes new development within or close to the existing kind of urban realm, then looks at new locations with really good public transport accessibility before we even start contemplating, freestanding settlements or locations which can only be accessed by the strategic road network. Those should really be right down at the bottom of our list of where we should stick housing. And then when it comes to development and placemaking, there's a whole bunch of kind of urban form characteristics that we really need to maximize. Most obviously density, where perhaps we don't want to go too far towards the picture on the left of your screen, but something a bit more appropriate to the kind of UK typology in the middle. We need to be pushing for much greater land use mix, moving away from monofunctional urban forms to promoting areas where everything is bundled in together. We need much higher levels of connectivity within our urban form, less of what you see on the left, which I'm sure is America, more of what you see on the right, which I'm sure you recognize as Barcelona. And then finally, accessibility, stop sticking houses in locations that just don't have good access to the kinds of things that people need to get to on a daily basis. Let's try and get our housing co-located along with health, schools, jobs, green spaces, etc. These are really kind of fundamental urban form planning principles that I'm sure nobody would disagree with. We don't really seem to be delivering that on the ground a lot of the time. This is, that one of the things we did at the RTPI was just try and condense all of the evidence for why what I've just said in the previous slides is critical if we want to be tackling economic productivity, climate change, public health, etc. And I point you towards this paper if you just want a kind of high-level run through all of the evidence that's currently out there. I thought as well it might be useful just to run through the hooks, the policy hooks that we have in the current national planning policy framework to support what I've just said, because a lot of the a lot of the wording is in the NPPF. This was revised in 2018, and it did place, a greater emphasis on strategic planning, so linking growth to infrastructure. There's good wording in there about locating significant development in locations which are or can be made sustainable, which is good. A stronger hook to think about transport issues at the really earliest stages of plan making. Again, good working about linking density to sustainable transport, about shaping patterns of settlement growth in ways that contribute to radical reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Much greater emphasis on demonstrating you have infrastructure commitments in place to support plan level viability and deliverability of your plan and housing targets. A lot of it kind of says the right words in policy, which is a good place to be starting from. And then over the last 5 or so years, there's been a decent amount of government support to try and better link up housing and employment growth with transport infrastructure. There's been some really good pilot programs done by the Cities and Local Growth Unit in places like York and Swindon. There's the Transforming Cities Fund and the Housing Infrastructure Fund, both of which try to link more closely together housing and strategic transport. We've seen the really useful emergence of subnational transport bodies across England, which provide that missing kind of strategic, or dare I say it, regional bit of governance that we've been lacking in this country for the last decade or so. Devolution to combined authorities has been a really positive step in places like Manchester and, of course, London, which has been doing this stuff fairly effectively for quite some time. The National Infrastructure Commission has been championing the integration of housing and transport. The Independent Transport Commission has been working on this stuff for a long time. So again, there's, it's not like we don't know what to do, and it's not like there isn't kind of funding out there. But why don't we see it consistently delivered on the ground? Why do we still get so much housing and new development in just rubbish, unsustainable locations? And we've been busily trying to kind of unpick the various barriers to this, which sadly is still very present across the country. Firstly, a lot of the planning policy on sustainable transport is a little bit vague. The guidance is a bit vague, especially when you compare it to planning policy for housing land supply and for housing, where there's much stronger language about what you have to do. When it comes to transport infrastructure planning, there's a whole bunch of different stakeholders that you have to engage in the plan making process that can make it quite tough. We're not very good at thinking about transport infrastructure in terms of its impact on settlement patterns. When we're deciding what to invest in, a lot of our decision making is guided by the desire to speed up journey times and things like that, which isn't really a solid basis for thinking about where we want to put our money. Very hard to capture uplifts in land value through the planning system. And when you do manage to do it, a lot of that money goes towards the delivery of affordable housing, which isn't always, which is an important thing to deliver, but when it comes at the expense of transport infrastructure, it can be a problem. And lastly, just like outside of really London and some of the combined authorities, it's just a real challenge to link up housing and transport. It's a lot of local authorities have been quite undermined by austerity. They're under a lot of pressure to meet short-term housing targets. There's lack of mechanisms for formal cooperation. So it's really tricky to actually get this kind of stuff done on the ground. And we really need to up our game on this, I think. We don't have the obvious sprawling congestion that you do see in many parts of the world, but there's really no room for complacency. And I'll just whiz through some of the kind of things that keep me up at night when I think about sustainable transport. Firstly, we're dealing with a legacy of settlement patterns which already lock in very high levels of car use. This is a map of London's commuter belt. Dark blue areas are places with really high levels of car dependency, and that's to a certain extent already baked into the system, which is quite worrying. Secondly, in England, there's quite a strong trend towards counter-urbanization, people moving out of big cities towards smaller towns and rural areas. This has been kind of masked in the past by statistics. These statistics, have been masked a little bit by immigration, because immigrants to the UK tend to go for, move towards to the big cities, but the kind of native population, if you will, actually displays these quite strong counter-urbanizing tendencies. And I think perhaps Brexit and COVID combined might exacerbate this trend, which just generally makes it harder to link people up with sustainable transport. Thirdly, we're dealing with just a huge legacy of rising car use over the last 50 or so years, as we expanded suburbs, as people moved there, as we built at densities which are just too low to provide with public transport. So, this is pretty much the reason why we've seen emissions from transport roughly doubled between the 1970s and 2006 and remains stubbornly high to date. And I think what's kind of underappreciated is that it's been changes in land use, changes in where people live and how they travel as a result of that have accounted for the majority of CO2 increase in transport since around 1970. It's where we've put our housing, where people live, and how we use our land that is really the thing that we need to grapple with if we want to get anywhere close to reducing emissions at the pace that we have to. In terms of what we've been doing at the RTPI to look at this, we did a big spatial analysis project over the last couple of years, looking at where planning permissions for new homes have been granted in rapidly expanding city regions like Bristol and Oxford and Leeds. This was the first type of analysis that I think has been done on this topic as far as I've seen, and it's allowed us to pick up some really useful evidence on, are we getting new housing in the right locations? And I would say, some of our data is broadly positive in that we are, by and large, managing to co-locate new housing with where the employment is. But when it comes to getting homes near to railway stations, in an easy walking or cycling distance to railway stations, I would argue that we need to get, we need those dark blue parts of the pie chart to be much, much larger if we want to have any chance in hitting our emission reduction targets, if we want to have any hope of increasing our economic productivity, tackling congestion, etc. And we're going to be hopefully updating this study with much more comprehensive data, much better spatial analysis, either this year or early next year. So keep an eye out for that when it happens. And I just wanted to wrap up with some other work that we're doing in this space, which I'm happy to talk about in more detail in the breakout rooms, but we're proactively working with government to try and update planning policy, guidance, and appraisal methodologies for transport. We're doing a lot of joint campaigning with other transport organisations and have been supporting the Transport for New Homes project, which the next speaker will no doubt reference. We produce guidance on the integration of land use and transport planning led by the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transportation, looking at how to tackle this problem of the very complex array of infrastructure providers that need to engage in the plan making process and make that better. And again, I'm not going to go into detail in my presentation here, but as the next speaker will be covering this, but we're working with a lot of different organizations to make sure that sustainable transport is really at the heart of our response to the government's proposals for a new planning system. So I hope that's helpful as a little whiz through kind of what I see as the role for planning in tackling the challenges that have been set out today. Very happy to take questions or speak about these more in the breakout rooms. But yeah, thanks to Brian for inviting me to speak. I'll stop. I'll turn off my screen now.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, that was a whistle-stop tour, but there's an awful lot of information crammed into it. Thank you. I greatly appreciate it. And I notice you've had positive responses on the chat. We won't take questions at this point. I think if there is a slot at the end when we have a chunk of time, then that would be the opportunity. But what I will ask now to do is for Richard Simmons from CPRE, if you could give your presentation, please, Richard, and then we will move forward from there. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry to disappoint you. It's actually the next but one speaker that talks about those things that James was just talking about. I've been asked to talk about green belts because 14 of our major cities do have a green belt wrapping around them. And when it comes to developing new places to live and work with connected transport, one of the issues that comes up is what do you do about the green belt? So I'm hoping that my presentation will start to work. There we go. The first thing I want to say is that you'll probably think of CPRE as a NIMBY organisation. That tends to be what we hear from people. So it's important to understand that we've actually been an organisation promoting good planning since 1926. And there's a couple of examples on the screen here of the kinds of things that we've done. And when the Greenbelt came in, it wasn't just the Greenbelt, of course. It was the Greenbelt and new towns, and CPRE was part of the kind of lobbying group that were looking for better places to live. And we remain in search of that, but we don't find the current planning system is quite delivering the sort of thing that we think it should be for the benefit of either the countryside or the town. Of course, the dream of living in the countryside, or Rus in urbe, the idea of the town in the countryside, has been a dream since at least the 1890s, certainly for the middle classes. You've all have heard about the new mutant algorithm, which is supposedly going to put a lot more housing onto greenfield sites soon. I thought it was worth just reflecting on this cartoon, which shows the days before computers how the mutant algorithm worked when it came to locating new housing. The blindfolded civil servant throwing darts at the map to choose the locations. A little cruel, perhaps, but underlying it is, I think, this cartoon is the idea that maybe the people in Whitehall don't necessarily quite understand the local as well as they could. It's a great cartoon anyway. So the National Planning Policy Framework at the moment protects the green belts. And it says the government attaches great importance to green belts. And what's interesting is that the essential green belts characteristics are that they're open and that they're permanent. And it's worth noting that they're not distinguished by necessarily greenness, they're distinguished by openness. And their purpose is to actually prevent the coalescence of towns and sprawl. And I think importantly, E there, which I've highlighted, one that's forgotten, which is to assist in urban regeneration by encouraging recycling of derelict and other urban land. And that is frequently forgotten in the debate about where we should put our homes. So what's happening to green belts in the planning white paper? Well, it appears that the government is sticking to the knitting here, and it's proposing that it would include in its protected zones green belt. Of course, many large cities have no green belt, but why is CPRE worried when we've actually got a promise from the government that they will protect green belts? The fact of the matter is, and this may be different under a zoning system than it is under the current planning system, which is discretionary, but green belts are hugely popular with people. A survey on their 60th anniversary showed that. You can see the figures here. But actually, there's been a 62% increase in the loss of greenfield green belt since 2013, and 148% increase in greenbelt housing consents since 2009. How can that happen when they're protected? Well, because you can review them and you can give exceptional consents, and that's what's been going on. So with the one hand, the government is saying it protects the countryside. On the other hand, it's saying, oh, well, you know, if people have decided locally that they have to build on the green belt, that's their local choice. The problem, of course, is that at the moment, and for some time past and into the future, the housing targets that are the centre of the planning system are what's driving local authorities to look for land. And I know from a recent conversation with somebody extremely senior at MHCLG that the reason that we're seeing so much greenfield development potential in the new Newton's algorithm is because, quote, it's cheaper and easier to build on greenfield sites than it is to build on brownfield. Now, I did most of my planning back in the day when we had people like Michael Heseltine and John Gummer running the show, and John Prescott. And their focus a lot of the time was on urban regeneration, that fifth objective for the Greenbelt. And I'd like to hear more about that as the government starts to develop planning. And there are a couple of reasons for that, really, apart from just defending the countryside. One is that for a long time, since the Second World War, when we developed antibiotics, our planning system moved away from the idea of public health being at the center of planning, and it moved more towards the idea that health was something dealt with by doctors in hospitals and doctor surgeries. You didn't have to worry about it when it came to the built environment. But we're now seeing, of course, with COVID-19, the absolutely vital importance of a public health model for planning. And that includes lots of open space where people live, near where they live. Never been clearer, really, since we've had COVID-19. And that's one of the things that green belts provide, of course. So, question, and this is a question that Brian asked me before the last time I spoke about this subject in Letchworth. Does the fact we need new housing mean we have to build on the countryside, particularly on areas of constraint? CPRE's view is that what is justified if we need new housing is proper strategic planning, as James just said. And we also need a recognition, which I don't think James did mention, that areas of constraint have strategic functions. At the moment, the countryside is just seen as land awaiting development in most planning documents, but actually it needs to be properly valued as natural capital and for its role in providing green infrastructure and places to breathe fresh, socially distanced air now as well. And that GI role is really important, but it has very little monetary value at the moment in the system compared with if you're a farmer being offered probably £1 million for land that is only worth about 100,000 for agricultural values. We do want to see new homes. Obviously, we're not saying people can't live in a new home, but they need to be in the right places, not just anywhere you can finesse a consent or where the local authority doesn't happen to have the right land supply. And we want to see brownfield first. So coming back to my point about regeneration, we'd like to see a much bigger investment in urban regeneration. A lot of the urban development corporations and development companies that were set up under the last Labour government were just abolished straight away by Cameron and his crew when they came in. And as Brian pointed out earlier, that must include high quality open spaces and good green infrastructure. So that's what we would see as gentle densification. We accept there'll be some greenfield development, but what we'd like to see is a sequential approach. So where brownfield is first, rather than just being mentioned as important, that we see some urban and suburban densification because it's a greener thing to do, because as James's plan of London just showed, that's where the public transport is. And then affordable homes in rural communities. At the moment, most of what gets built in the Greenbelt is not affordable by the average person, unfortunately. We have data to show that. We want to see urban extensions as the next priority, but ones that don't conflict with essential protections, and then new settlements. But in all cases, they need to be holistic and well-planned and accessible, well-designed, triple bottom line sustainable, and preferably with great access to beautiful open land, but particularly not the distant, random, car-driven housing estates that we know we're seeing a lot of at the moment. So what about transport and travel then? Well, of course, a key government aim at the moment set out in the road investment strategy post-2020 is creating new opportunities for housing and development to allow towns and cities to grow. And I well remember a conversation at an event about the Oxford, Cambridge, Milton Keynes ARC with a senior civil servant when he said, well, we've got to have the housing in the ARC to justify building the new expressway. And my jaw dropped. But that's the kind of thinking that still exists, unfortunately, in government at the moment. The RTPI has shown that if we build 1 million additional homes in the metropolitan Greenbelt without good public transport access, that's 825,000 new commuters travelling in private vehicles. So we want to see public transport improved with concentrated housing, employment and transport density at railway and rapid transit stations, the connected cities model. And we want to see a new model for biosecure public transport. If, for example, that meant lower occupancy, but higher frequency, that would be fantastic. That's exactly what we want for rural communities. So a rethink of how we provide public transport in a biosecure environment might actually have tremendous benefits for people. If we got the squeeze out of the public transport, we spread out the commuting, and we were able to offer more frequent services on a metro type basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Yes, good to know the idea of going back to the original source of town planning and what it was intended to achieve. We've tended to forget about the cholera outbreaks and so forth that were the norm in the 19th century. We've been so successful in all our efforts that we've dismissed the underlying necessity. I will now make a brief presentation, it certainly won't be very long, about certain aspects of the connected cities. Could I ask, can anybody see a slide that says connected cities public transport at the heart of all new development?
Yes, Brian, we can see that.
That's shared. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, it's just my screen suddenly blotted out. And I should explain that this is related to connected cities and the issues that we're talking about today, but actually it's the presentation that was supposed to be part of the transport session we've just had. I will run through this very quickly. So a connected city is a federation of towns that are already linked by railway lines that decide to come together to decide where their development will be. And the development will be around railway stations, either existing ones or new ones. There's always a hub town, which is the largest of the group that comes together. And the extent of the connected city is defined by the fact that no journey should be more, rail journey should be more than 15 minutes from that hub town. So trains that are passing along this highly congested system that we have at present will take two forms essentially. First of all, there'll be through fast trains, which stop only at these hub towns. And then there will be stopping trains that stop at all the other stations along the line. The focus is on developing walkable areas. So this is the area within 1 kilometre of a station. And on the diagram that you have in front of you here, the yellow circles represent the 1 kilometre circles around the existing stations. The yellow dotted lines represent the borders of the existing towns. And the green circles represent 1 kilometre circles around what are potentially new railway stations. And within these, the focus is entirely upon livable and walkable areas. And so the active transport becomes the obvious first step in a process of active transport, followed perhaps by public transport, followed by active transport. And the system that we propose embraces all forms of transport. So everything that's here on there. We certainly feel that there is a need for private vehicles. They're not going to be banned from the system, but we would like the focus to be more towards vehicles that have to carry things and deliver things and are necessary for the purpose of people's trades. Because the idea is to design a world in which people have a reasonable choice and that they can easily and uncomplicatedly function without the need of a private car. In each of these areas, the through traffic is diverted away from the centre. The centre, where the railway station is, will be pedestrianised, but the through traffic is diverted away from that to give a central pedestrianised core to the kilometre radius circle. And within that, there'll be the railway station, obviously, interchange with other public transport, but also retail, leisure, common community facilities, and a degree of housing, perhaps. But there will be a great focus on linking all of the pedshed to this core, using dedicated pedestrian and cycling routes, and these will be protected. So they will be protected from the worst of our elements, not all of them, obviously. But the good news about the fact that this is potentially expensive, but we believe can be delivered at very low cost, or indeed at zero cost, because there now exists transparent photovoltaic glass. And this is real bus shelter in real Canary Wharf. And as you can see by looking at it, it's transparent glass, but it generates enough power to drive the average London flat. So the very least that we think can be achieved in terms of connecting all these elements together is to have both protection and free street lighting provided for. And over time, we believe that there's a serious profit to be made from this kind of investment. So that is the end of my share at that point. I will now ask Jenny to step forward and tangle with the relationship between transport and housing in the current white paper. Thank you. Jenny, all yours.
Right, unmute, share screen. Right, share. Has it worked?
Yeah, we can see this.
Yeah. Okay, I hope I can make the slides move around. So I'm Jenny Raggett and I'm from Transport for New Homes. And as it says on our first slide, we believe that new housing should come with public transport, walking and cycling, and not a dependence on cars. So that's the gist of it. Now, if I press something, does it move?
You have to scroll down.
Oh, that's it. I've done it.
There you are. Yeah.
Okay. So what does this, I'm mostly going to try and get people to respond to the planning white paper. So the purpose of these slides are really to encourage you to put pen to paper or start typing and send a missive to the ministry, telling them what you think of the white paper. So I'll just go through quickly some of the things we've said. So we asked, well, what does this white paper say about transport? And actually, our conclusion is not much. We did a rough word count and we found, although the word local, 308 instances, lots about beauty and beautiful development. Actually, when it came down to it, to our amazement, bus, 0 mentions, train, railway, 0, a bit on walking, cycling, but really not very much. Our conclusion was transport's more or less left out of planning again. But on the other hand, that's an opportunity for all of us to respond to the consultation. Now, when it came to the actual white paper proposals, just some of the things that we're concerned about, the housing targets, well, looking at what's suggested, they really go up in a lot of rural and semi-rural areas. And these are just the places where public transport's very sparse. There does seem to be, when you look at the actual figures, a certain amount of green belt jumping into the countryside. And I know that's contentious, but it does mean that a lot of the development appears to be pushed into places where you are going to end up with car-based sprawl unless you're very careful. There seemed to be, well, the duty to cooperate, which did exist before, cooperation between local authorities, is to go. So that means unless it's a big city area, for many places, many local authorities won't need to really talk to the people next door as far as we can turn out. So your Wiltshires may not need to talk to your Somersets or Bristol, for example. And this is really missing a trick when it comes to improving rail or tram or light rail or bus routes. You do have to look at things from a strategic or, dare I say, regional planning point of view, but that doesn't seem to be on the cards. The other thing that's a bit weird is the idea that all land in England is zoned into just 3 categories called protected, renewal and growth. I won't go into detail, but most of the countryside that is not actually designated as Green Belt or AONB does end up as growth. Well, that has repercussions for sustainable transport, because does that mean you can just build in the middle of the countryside a whole new settlement? How are you going to service that with sustainable transport? So I mean, from what we can work out, and it is difficult to work out exactly what the white paper is talking about because it does leave a lot to the imagination, but it seems that we will risk the same mistakes as we've been making, large greenfield car-based sites in the countryside, or it actually might get worse. So, I mean, this is the kind of thing that Transport for New Homes has seen. This is a pretty standard issue, greenfield site, lots of parking, car-based, houses off big roundabouts, primary schools off link roads, generally not very good for sustainable transport at all. Here's another one, a roundabout in the middle of the estate and a link road right through where you live. So the general theme is car-based. And from what our research, and we've gone to visit an awful lot of new housing estates, as soon as you build them in the wrong location, they will end up like this. It just seems to happen every time. We've got a report out about garden villages and garden towns, and we did look at the transport infrastructure that came with them. And it's just amazing the number of garden villages that have to have enlarged motorway junctions or even new motorway junctions. And this is on the assumption that way into the future, 2040 and beyond, the number of car trips is going to be so great that unless this is done, it'll be catastrophic for the residents. They won't be able to get out. But of course, there's no analysis as to what this means for the whole motorway system, let alone for congestion in our cities. Lack of joined up thinking. We also discovered for all these greenfield estates that when the consultants were brought in to assess the transport, it was all about the number of car journeys per house, where the bottlenecks would ensue, which junctions to unblock, which bypasses to build. And it was hardly ever about buses, trains, or public transport. Even walking and cycling would get maybe a couple of mentions. So our feeling is we clearly need to respond to the white paper to flag these issues up and insist on a different future where new homes are built with the right light rail, trams, buses, whatever you like. I think it is the case that the authors of the white paper really don't understand the important role that transport plays in placemaking, lifestyles and health and sustainability. The government mysteriously say, we want beautiful development, but you try building a beautiful place that's dominated by parking and tarmac. And I mean, it's not easy because for a lot of people, you look out your window and that you see a car park. So what we need to explain as well, we believe, is the location of new homes is really important in terms of public transport links, walkable places, lifestyles and so on, and a low carbon future. We need to somehow get into the white paper the notion that you need to build along public transport corridors, either new or existing. It could be a new rail route, an existing but improved rail route, a tram line. It's done in Europe. It needs to be done here, and it could be, but we need the white paper to at least mention it, and it doesn't. Digital mapping, the government says they're keen on digital mapping. They talk about it, but what are they actually talking it used for? It could be used to optioneer very carefully where to build over a large area to coordinate new greenfield development along a public transport route. For example, will it be used for that? It needs to be suggested. So in summary, please respond to the white paper, whether you can put forward completely different things than some of the things I've said. Read the white paper. All you do is you search for planning for the future. You have to scroll down to where it says ways to respond. And then you can either respond online, which is rather complicated because I think there's 80 different questions, or you can just send a missive to the email address here. Transport for new homes, we hope to, on our website, have some suggested responses for you and a simple way of sending them off with a click. So you might want to have a look at our website too. Right, thank you. Oh, that was it.
Okay, thank you very much, Jenny. Greatly appreciated. And we'll circulate the your website URL after the event, obviously, because we want people to take a very active interest in that.
Yeah, different people will have different things to say, but the most important thing is to respond and to flag up the lack of transport in the white paper. And, you know, I don't know, it's an omission. Okay, I'll press that. Right.
Right, okay, fine. We're now free of that. So I will now just talk very briefly about, once again, connected cities, I'm afraid, because obviously this is my chosen subject, as it were. And I will share this diagram, which is a single diagram, but it describes in a series of stages how one looks to see where connected city might be. And stage one, which is at the top of this diagram, shows a rail line, a notional rail line, with a series of stations along it. Obviously, they're not actually going to be uniformly distributed in the way that this shows, but that's the principle, that there are a series of rail lines, a series of stations along the line. Step number one after that is to determine which towns along that line have populations greater than 50,000. And for purposes of this, we've assumed that there'll be two. And obviously towns as big as 50,000 tend to be fairly well distributed. So on our stretch of line, we have two towns here, which are 50,000. Everything else is smaller than that. These stations and towns will become the hubs of connected cities. And when you look at the third section down, you'll see that for 15 minutes travel time, either side of them, every station falls within a potential, the connected city of the hub town. So these are large connected cities because they have populations around about 200,000 by the time you've added everything together, maybe sometime a bit bigger. It depends on circumstances, obviously, but they're substantial. Step number three is to look at the gap between the big, large connected cities. And so you start looking at the next biggest size of town, around about 15K, 12K, that kind of number of population. And you see how they pan out. So you then focus on those as potential hubs of small connected cities. And the next thing to do is look at, well, what's 15-minute journey time from those hubs? And at this point, it's normally fairly clear, but having done this on several occasions, you do find yourself in situations in which there appear to be kind of overlaps between two connected cities. And that is fine, because having done this initial very simple analysis, obviously the thing to do is return to the real people on the real ground who have a real interest in this and say, here is the potential. Please discuss amongst yourselves what you think actually works for you, because we're not proposing to impose this from above. We're simply using it as a way of beginning an important conversation about how towns can coordinate one with another in order to plan for where they're going to put their growth, but obviously with public transport at the heart of it. So I will stop my share at that point, and we will now go into the breakout rooms where you'll have an opportunity to talk 15 minutes with each of the individual speakers. John, could you handle things from here, please?
Okay, thanks, Brian. Just to explain about the breakout rooms, the idea is you can choose between any of the three breakout rooms featuring the three main presentations that you've heard so far. In a minute, I'm going to click a button and you may get some options on your screen to choose for yourself. If you don't worry, stay where you are. I'll come back and help you go through it. So bear with me while I click a few buttons and we'll see what happens. Okay, so if you have an option on your screen now to assign yourself, please do it. If you don't worry. We'll have a system very shortly for helping you get into the right room. So what we're going to do is we're going to call out your names, and I'd just like you to say the breakout room you'd like to go to. So the order, I'm afraid, is pretty random, but Peter Thompson, I'd guess you'd like to go with Peter Thompson. Would you like to go to James?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Please. Yep. Mike Roberts.
Oh, definitely with James.
Okay. Nick. The person who's haven't got a surname for Nick. Okay. We'll move on. Is that Nikki Barton?
With Richard, please.
Okay. And I'll put you in there again. Andrew Pritchard.
Jenny Raggett, please.
Jan Lee.
Richard Simmons, please.
Glyn Thomas. Glyn Thomas, which room would you like to go to? You need to unmute, perhaps.
Yes, I had difficulty with my IT here and I missed the first 20 minutes of this discussion.
Okay.
Can you remind us who the speakers are?
Well, there's James Harris, Richard Simmons and Jenny Raggett.
Yes, but what did they talk about?
I'll come back to you in a moment, Glyn, if I may. I'll come help some of the others. Sir Han.
Jenny, please.
John Liddell. John Liddell, do you have a choice of breakout room? No. Okay. Camilla. Camilla, would you like to go to a room?
I've already clicked my thing, but I said Richard Simmons.
Okay. Angela.
James
Vincent.
Harris, please.
Anthony Joyce. Peter Wakefield.
James, please.
John Webb. John Webb, I might need to unmute. No. Okay. Robert Singleton.
James, please.
Okay. Right. Nick. No. Glyn Thomas. Oh, right, Glyn. Gosh, what did these people talk about?
Who they are?
Right. Okay. James Harris was... can anybody else help me out here? He spoke about planning and different things like that. Jenny Raggett talked about the white paper.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard Simmons was from CPRE.
I think I prefer James Harris.
Okay. Right. John Liddell? No. Anthony
yes, I am here.
Oh,
I am here. So
okay.
I was just on a phone call there because I had to
okay.
do that.
Which room would you like to go to?
James, please.
James. Okay. Anthony Joyce. Would you like to go to one of the breakout rooms? Might need to unmute yourself to tell me. Anthony, can you switch your mic on? Can't hear you at the moment because your mic's off. You need to click unmute. Perhaps at the bottom left of your screen if you're on a computer.
There we are.
There we are.
Yeah, James Harris, please.
Okay.
Well, welcome back, everybody. 15 minutes always seems to fly by in these breakout sessions. However, we do have considerable amount of time now in order to consider what happened in the breakout groups and then open up to a discussion amongst the entire floor, as it were. So could I ask James, please, can you give us a 2-minute synopsis of the key features of the breakout room in which you were the speaker?
Sure. So we covered the role of discussing what data needs to be made available in order to allow for good plan making to take place. Nicholas Falk was talking about whether, is there a way that we can have much better data on land values and income tax and things like that to help us guide our decisions around where we put new housing and where we invest in transport infrastructure. Lots of concern raised about the proposed impacts of the planning white paper in terms of where new housing is going to be located. If there are high targets in areas with severe transport constraints, is that going to be sufficient to stop applications coming forward and growth taking place in unsustainable locations? And so a real need to, a question around what can we do to tighten up the planning system to deal with that better. And I was saying that it's not just that we need to tighten up, say, planning policy and legislation and guidance. It's also about strengthening the criteria upon which transport bodies like Highways England and Network Rail make their investments, so that we're all working on a shared set of sustainability criteria that guides both plan making and infrastructure investment decisions. There was reference made to the Highways England Road Investment Strategy, RIS2, on what criteria is that investment being made? Does it align with the sustainability criteria that we use in plan making? I don't really think it does. And then finally, some questions around what's the appropriate kind of infrastructure funding regime to support plan making? Can we devolve a much greater portion of well, you'd need to both devolve and expand transport infrastructure investment. So it's up to groups of local authorities to actually decide what they want to invest in. They can make those decisions in a much more certain way rather than ad hoc bidding to kind of centrally government held funding pots for transport. Because you really need, again, you need to be able to develop and fund a solid transport infrastructure strategy for a given place, in my mind, before you embark on the local plan making process that deals with site allocations. You need to have certainty that the transport infrastructure investment is going to be there to deliver both growth and development and regeneration, but also the massive changes that we need to see in terms of how people move around, modal shift to public transport, active transport, etc.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Yes, very concise. So next in line, Richard, could you give us a rundown, please, of your conversations?
Yeah, I think we started off by talking about the fact that around the country, a lot of local authorities are seeing their local plans either disavowed by government or not unable to proceed because they aren't putting enough housing on greenfield sites, and something which I've experienced locally here as well. And so that's making it very difficult to actually believe anybody when they say that a zone or the countryside is protected. We had an interesting discussion about whether a settlement pattern based on the kind of sun and planets model that Ebenezer Howard had, or that you get if you have a green belt around a place, is better for public transport than urban sprawl, because the sun and planets requires orbital systems which can take a long time to travel around, whereas allowing urban sprawl means you get lots of radial routes. But we came back to the point that actually you can't rely on a bus timetable these days, because it all depends whether the private sector wants to provide a bus service or not. And so actually it's really difficult when you're planning to know what's going to happen to public transport. And the same is true of railways, actually, in the sense that you can have a station, but whether the trains will actually stop there is a very interesting question. Network Rail may build you a station, but your TOC may not want to actually give you a train. And we were just about to get on to whether we should build a new Milton Keynes when we ran out of time. So obviously there is a proposal for 1 million new homes in the Oxfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Milton Keynes arc. Whether that's going to be New Milton Keynes or lots of isolated housing estates off an expressway, I think remains to be seen at the moment. But we just got to that point when we were dragged back.
Oh, right. Well, that's a very good sign that things were just getting going when you stopped.
Sorry, I should have said also that we did also talk about the biodiversity crisis and whether public transport and walking and cycling corridors can actually become green corridors that we can use to address biodiversity issues as well, which I think is a really great idea.
Yeah, and very much in line with CPRE, presumably. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent. So, Jenny, I imagine things were fairly hectic in yours, weren't they? Jenny, are you still with us?
I'm muted, Jenny.
Yeah, sorry, it was muted. So there was a discussion as to where this white paper came from and who the authors actually were. And there were various theories on that count. Then there was a lot of discussion sort of clarifying the white paper, really, because it's quite a technical paper and it can't be, and I think I didn't realise how technical it was. Just a minute. Oh. Sorry, I'll just be interrupted by somebody coming in. Yeah, there was a lot of discussion about affordable housing, about the frustrations of getting rail actually off the ground, the reality of doing things, and all the while, I suppose I understood that a lot of people really don't understand how the planning system works at the moment, and I think it's something I need to explain more clearly on our website. So that was my drift. Thank you. Yeah.
Fine. Okay, thank you very much. Right, well, if you click on the participants tab at the bottom of your screen, I think it's, well, somewhere on your screen, depending on what sort of device you're using, it should throw up not only a list of everybody who's here, but the option to raise your hand if you wish to ask a question, because we are now in the main plenary session. Here we go. Yes, thank you very much, John, for all the information that we need to how to do this. Interesting enough, on my particular screen, I don't have the hand, but I did this morning, so I believe in its existence and I've observed it with other people. So I noticed that Christina Biggs has immediately put hers up. So Christina, would you like to have the floor, please?
Thank you. I was just interested to know who else in this plenary has already formulated a response to planning white paper, because I think we've heard of it and really didn't know whether we're going to respond or not, because I didn't really want to immerse myself. But Jenny's explanation, the algorithm was very helpful, so thank you, Jenny. And I'd really like to see other people's responses in draft form, just so we can share thoughts and points, make our voice more loud and coherent.
Okay, well, I noticed that as you were saying that, Richard put his hand up. So Richard, you're muted. Do you wish to speak, Richard? If so, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, it keeps muting.
Ah.
or something was muting me. I think it stopped muting now. I didn't touch it, but it muted me. That's Zoom for you. What I was going to say is that I've been involved in some discussions with some senior people in MHCLG. And it's worth saying, I think, that although the white paper is quite technical, and I can't say who said this because it was Chatham House, but what they said is it sets out the general principles and direction of travel, but if you want detail, you won't get it because there isn't any yet. And they are still very open to trying to work out how to actually deliver what ministers want from the system. So I think what they said is the white paper has got a greenish tinge. So in other words, it's not a green paper, but there's a lot of work needs it. And that's because the system is so big and complex at the moment. I imagine James has heard similar things at the RTPI as well. So it is actually, just to say, it's really worthwhile making a contribution. we've at CPRE, we've been very focused on the first consultation, which was about the mutant algorithms, I keep calling it. So the changes to the current planning system, which will impose mandatory housing targets on every local authority. But that was launched at the same time as the planning white paper. And if you were a fan of Yes Minister, you might think that launching the two consultations simultaneously was a distraction technique to take your eyes off the planning white paper. Well, I'm sure they didn't really mean to do that, but it certainly worked that way for us. So we're now just getting to the point where we're starting to develop our response. But it would appear from what both ministers and officials are saying that they really do want to genuinely hear what people have to say. And especially if you can help them to make it work, they'd really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, that's immensely encouraging. And also, if I remember correctly, it's the 29th of October is the deadline?
Yes.
Yeah, so it does give us some kind of opportunity. Excellent. Camilla, you have asked to take the opportunity to take the floor.
Yes, I was just occurred to me that actually because the white paper seems to be so desperately lacking in kind of stuff that we probably all feeling we should be in there. I'm thinking that the UN Sustainable Development Goals, they set out, the 17 goals set out really extraordinary principles and targets, very high level. And I think it'd be very useful for probably everyone who's thinking about compiling a response to the white paper to look at them, because there are lots of things you can pick out there. Almost all of it is relevant to us today. There are probably only one or two of the goals that seem a bit remote from, say, UK, but most of it relates to us, because ultimately it's all about dignity for people and the planet. So it brings together sort of good development. And another thing that's sort of come to light, I don't know how many people have come across this crazy notion, well, it's only crazy because of the name, which is the donut economics, which Kate Rayworth at Oxford University has brought forward. She called it donuts, but simply because she's used a sort of round graphic form to represent it. But what the donut economics do is that they link sort of the planetary resources and development and people and economics. So it links it all together. It's about living within our means, within one planet. So I think those 2 points are good points of reference for this white paper, which seems to be so utterly lacking in any sort of sensitivity of the things that are our current crises. It's just a point, a suggestion.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Fine. Well, Christina, you have is it just that your hand is still raised from previously, or that?
Yeah, sorry, just point of clarification. I think there's a mention of 2 different consultations, and then Camilla mentioned 2 points, and I haven't caught the second of either of those 2 things. So firstly, what's this other consultations that plonked in at the same time as the white paper one that we should be aware of?
Well, it's gone.
What was it?
That was right. There was a consultation on the methodology to be used for calculating housing targets.
Oh no!
No, but I did put out many alerts, so I hope
I'm sure.
Responded. I think I put one out to the Google Transport for Greater Bristol, actually.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, I mean, we just deluge with consultation, so we never know which one's the most important one to. Don't worry about it. So that's number 1 point. So Camilla, what were your 2 points? You said there was a website where you could see comments, and then you said there were 2 points. So,
well, okay. So I mean, the 2 bits of guidance that I think could be useful to look at are the UN Sustainability Development Goals. So you just go on to UN Habitat SDGs and you'll get it. And you can read all 17 goals. And underneath each goal, it sort of sets targets of how any place might try to achieve those goals. And the other one is the donut economics theory.
Donut,
donut, like the you know, donut with jam in the middle. This is circular theory with a hole in the middle, the idea that it's linking kind of planets, people and economics all together. And the lady is Kate Rayworth.
Okay.
And she's at Oxford. But I think if you put in donut economics, it will come up. And it's just interesting to read, listen. I think there's some YouTube presentations by her and stuff like that.
Okay.
I think they're useful references for moving on from this sort of really kind of tawdry language that the government has put out in the white paper at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay, can I just respond to that quickly? That I know it sounds maybe a bit far-fetched, but the white paper is not really about that level of intelligent thinking. It is about delivering new homes. That is and speeding up the process. Now, you need to understand the process as it is. So the way, for example, targets are given to local authorities, landowners come forward with their fields that they want to build on, promoters and developers then approach local authorities. Then, you know, there's debates about how much money will be spent, this and that, barristers and the legal profession get involved, blah, blah, blah. So then after that, there's a choice of sites. Then there's the consultation on the choice of sites, the use of government policy, and it goes on and on. It's a complicated system. And I really would, I'm now realizing my layman's guide to the planning process, I ought to revamp it really, because in a funny way, you need to respond to the machinery that exists and the new machinery that's being specified. If you put forward a more intelligent, more holistic approach, I fear it will go over their heads. I know that sounds extraordinary, but I mean, there are other people maybe who've got experience in this, but that I don't know what James thinks, but I just think that would they listen to a more sort of mature approach, a holistic approach to sustainability? Is that a good idea to use? I mean, that was my initial reaction, but I hope I'm wrong. What do you think, James?
Well, we will have to find out. Thank you, Jenny. Anthony Joyce, you had...
Well, yes, I just wanted to report that, in fact, the Oxford Civic Society, which of course is very much involved in many of these problems, has, I think, is now on its 7th draft of our response to the white paper.
So you've taken this on board seriously, and you're about...
Oh, very seriously, because of course, I mean, and as Nicholas was saying, I mean, it does affect the whole of our region. But one of the things that does concern me in some of the discussions we've had is, I mean, I do think that some method of achieving real teeth into the duty to cooperate is essential. Certainly in areas where you've got so many different local authorities, and when you're trying to deal with the other major organizations, a combined approach to them from a group of local authorities is something that ought to happen.
Very true.
Yes, and at present we lack that mechanism, don't we? I agree. Right, I'm just checking to see if there are any other raised hands in the system. Nope, no obvious ones. So, wait a minute. Camilla, you decided you want to come back on the question?
I'm just sitting here and listening to it all, and I so agree with what Jenny Raggett said, which if we want to respond effectively to the white paper, we've got to kind of put their hats on and kind of be in that zone that they're in. There's never been a greater opportunity for change than right now, because we are in a crisis. We're in a climate crisis, we're in a biodiversity crisis, and it's time, I think, probably to challenge, to say, look, let's not stop tweaking these old things or just facilitating things. Let's think more holistically about our future and try and force a dialogue with the government that actually addresses those issues, because the white paper just glosses over the issues completely. It's just facilitating development, delivery of houses quickly.
Okay.
End of point, end of rant.
Okay, but James and Richard, you have both had obvious, direct connection with the people who are in the process of dealing with this on the other side. Do you think that the kind of approach that Jenny thought wouldn't work, do you think she is correct in her assumptions there?
I would, yeah, it's a hard one. I would try and think about, like as Jenny said, what the government's trying to achieve, right? Their focus is so that, at the next election, they can turn around and say, under us, X number of X 100,000 homes were built. So that is going to be the priority for them. Right? And they do want a simplified planning system. They like the idea of things being sped up, simplified, clearer policies on what can go where. Some of that stuff isn't necessarily bad. What we need to do is show how they can meet those objectives while also doing all of the things that in many cases they have a legal obligation to do as well. The big one I keep coming back to is climate change. There's a legal duty that connects the planning system to the delivery of carbon budgets and the net zero carbon target by 2050. One of the key areas that I'm focusing on is how can the government use this opportunity for planning reform? The same is very much true for what will hopefully be enshrined in the Environment Act when we finally get to see that. Now, there are clear legal things that the planning system has a responsibility to help deliver. We need to point out that there are ways to unlock new development, get things built out at pace, but there are things that you need to do that and also achieve these other goals that the government needs to achieve. And a lot of the time, I would say that it's worth in your responses saying that setting out what type of planning system you want to see to deliver that, but also being very clear that delivering this is not just about planning. There are lots of agents that interact with the planning system, like infrastructure providers, for example, like DEFRA and the way that they go about planning for the natural environment. There are plans and investment strategies being made by non-local planning authorities that need to support the delivery of local authority planning objectives. And it's really important to pick up in all of your responses what those responsibilities are, because at the moment we have a planning system that's tasked with the delivery of a lot of housing, but lacks the powers and the funding and the support of other critical agencies to do that, which is why you end up with such poor outcomes in a lot of places. What we need to say is that if government wants to deliver this reform and achieve what it wants to achieve, it's not just an MHCLG problem, it's a Department for Transport problem, it's a BEIS problem, it's a DEFRA problem, and all of them need to be committed to supporting planning reform that delivers growth, delivers new homes, sure, but also ticks all those other boxes, because it's not just, you can't just rely on the planning system to achieve that, which is the issue that we have now.
Right. I'm told that ministers are focused laser-like on getting more housing, but they're also focused laser-like on getting more beauty and on getting more sustainability. So officials are being asked all the time, apparently, on pretty much a daily basis, they say, how will this deliver more housing, and how will it be more beautiful, and how will it be more sustainable? So actually, I think they've got an almost impossible conundrum there in some ways, given the development system we're working with at the moment, because obviously, the house builders are really only interested in maximizing shareholder value, and why wouldn't they be? That's their job. I've put in the chat a paper that I wrote for a recent discussion we had, which was welcomed by officials, which is what would a planning system look like if it was designed to deal with the climate and biodiversity emergency. Basically, it's a set of tests. I've got 10 tests, although you could have more, which the system doesn't currently meet. So that was welcome. So I think they are interested in how they resolve this dilemma. And as you know, dilemma is not a problem. A problem has a solution, a dilemma doesn't. A dilemma only has the answer you choose. So I think they will want to know how they can get more houses, but they want to know how they can do that sustainably and beautifully. If anyone's got the magic key to answer that question, then I think they really welcome it.
Yes, well, it's getting ahead of them. So thank you very much, everybody. It's absolutely hit the nail of 3:30. I'm extremely impressed by our collective timing, so we can integrate ourselves, even if we can't integrate all the government departments. Thank you, John. We'll be back at 4:30 for the last session of the day, which is about delivery, how, having taken into account all the things we've talked about in the first 3 sessions, they all can come together and be financed and delivered. So, John, can I ask, do you wish to do your quick tutorials for the Zoom upgraders, or have you just...
No, I think Brian, we might let that one go. I think
okay, fine.
Everybody's had their fill of Zoom upgrades, I think.
Great, good news indeed. So thank you, everybody, and we will end this session here and look forward to seeing you in just under an hour's time, around about 16:20. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the speakers, I must add, of course.
Could we just run through who the speakers are and what the following sessions are, please?
Yes, indeed. We've got, get back to it. Speakers will be, yes, they will begin with Andrew Williams of Network Rail Property. It will then be Edward Clark of Litchfields, who will be, in both Jenny and Richard should be interested in it. He'll be talking about the success or otherwise of the garden settlements program, because they've done an in-depth study of that, and looked at the ways in which people have tried to deliver and the success that they have achieved or not achieved. And then yourself, Dr. Nicholas Falk, will speak as the third of the 3 main speakers.
On the subject of funding metroisation.
On the subject of funding metroisation and all the other development, but particularly metroisation, yes. Okay, thank you, everybody. And look forward to seeing you in just under an hour's time. Cheers.